September 21st, 1805. The Bitterroot Mountains near present-day Idaho-Montana border. The air is thin, sharp with the coming winter. It's not snowing yet, but the promise of it hangs in every gust that whips through the towering, dark pines. The sound is a constant, low moan in the branches, broken only by the labored crunch of hooves on rocky ground and the hacking of axes against deadfall. Men wrapped in worn leather and wool, their faces gaunt with exhaustion, move like ghosts through the silent, immense forest. They are lost, starving. Their horses, ribs protruding, are beginning to be butchered for food. This is the core of discovery, and Meriwether Lewis, William Clark, and their party are about to become the first American citizens to cross into the land that will become Montana. But they are not the first to be shaped by its brutal majesty, nor to understand that this land does not yield. It decides, and its story began not with footsteps, but in a vast, warm, vanished sea. Forget the mountains. Rewind 70 million years, where the Bitterroots now stand, a shallow, warm ocean teems with life. The sky is hazy, the air thick and humid. Here in this ancient Montana sea, a Tyrannosaurus rex, 40 feet of muscle and serrated bone, dies on a muddy shore. Its colossal carcass sinks into the silt. Eons pass. The sea retreats, its bed buckling, rising, transforming into plains, and then thrusting skyward into mountains. The sediment becomes stone, entombing the king. This is the first truth of Montana. It is built upon a kingdom of the dead, a geological monument to time itself. This land remembers everything. Cut forward, 13,000 years ago, the glaciers have receded, carving the sheer valleys and leaving behind a cooler, greener landscape. Now human footsteps arrive. Small family bands, descendants of those who crossed the Bering Land Bridge, move south along the eastern flank of the Rockies. They are hunters, and they find a paradise of megafauna. Imagine the sight. A woolly mammoth, a creature of mythic scale, trumpets as a spear tipped with Clovis Point flint, crafted from Montana chert, finds its mark. This successful hunt isn't just a meal, it's a covenant. These first Montanans learn the rhythms of the buffalo, the migration routes, the sacred places where the spirit world feels close. They carve vision quest sites at places like Pictograph Cave, leaving handprints and animal figures in red ochre, not just art but a declaration. We were here. We saw this beauty and it meant something. For millennia, these indigenous cultures evolve in concert with the land. By the time European horses, spreading north from Spanish territories, reach the region in the 1700s, distinct nations have forged their identities in this crucible. The Blackfeet Confederacy, powerful and territorial, rule the northern plains east of the mountains, master horsemen and warriors. The Crow or Apsaluk, children of the large beaked bird, hold the southeastern plains and the Powder River country, renowned for their eloquence and equestrian skill. In the mountain valleys to the west, the Salish, Pend-d'Oreille, and Kootenai peoples develop intricate knowledge of the high country secrets. The land shapes their gods, their economies, their very souls. The buffalo provides food, shelter, clothing, tools. Its annual movement is the calendar, its abundance the measure of security. This is a complete, complex world, a tapestry of cultures woven over centuries. Which brings us back to that cold, desperate September in 1805. Lewis and Clark, agents of a young nation dreaming of a continental empire, are insects crawling across the spine of the continent. When they finally stumble out of the Bitterroots, they are met not by empty wilderness, but by the Salish people. The encounter is one of mutual astonishment and profound need. The Corps trades the last of their trinkets for dried fish and roots, salvation that comes from the very people whose world their journey will irrevocably change. Clark scribbles in his journal about the tolerable level valley they enter, the future site of Missoula. They build canoes from ponderosa pine and push off onto a river they name for the president, but which the Salish know as NL stroke a Y symbol 313C Hatchek KWU, a source of life for millennia. The Corps passage is a scratch on the surface. They map, name, and document, but they do not conquer. They leave behind a few guns, some whispers of a powerful new nation to the east, and the lethal, unwitting gift of disease. The smallpox that will follow in their wake is a specter they cannot see. For now, the real power still resides in the buffalo herds darkening the plains, in the strength of the Blackfeet cavalry, and in the ancient stones that hold the bones of dinosaurs. But a threshold has been crossed. The American idea has entered Montana. It will be decades before it returns in force, but the seed, tiny and fragile as it is, has been planted in the richest soil imaginable, a land of unimaginable wealth, beauty, and conflict, sleeping under the big sky. May 26, 1864. Alder Gulch, Montana Territory. The sound is not of wind or buffalo, but of 10,000 men. A ceaseless, chaotic din of picks biting into gravel, water sluicing through rockers, axes felling trees, and the raw cacophony of a city being born from mud and greed. The air, cold and thin at this altitude, is thick with the smells of sweat, smoke, and hope. Canvas tents and crude log shanties climb the steep hillsides of the gulch. This is Virginia City, and it is less than a year old. Just months earlier, a prospecting party led by Bill Fairweather and Henry Edgar, desperate and fleeing from a band of Crow warriors, stopped here to pan a creek. The flakes of gold they found were so plentiful, they called it the stuff. The news exploded like a bomb. Now the isolated world of the indigenous nations and the handful of Jesuit missionaries and fur traders is shattered forever by a human stampede. Montana is no longer a passage to somewhere else. It is the destination. And its wealth will be bought with rivers of gold and blood. This is the era of the Gilded Dream. The Montana Territory, carved from the vast Idaho Territory just weeks after the Alder Gulch strike, is an infant governed by sheer, volatile momentum. The Civil War rages in the distant east, but here, the only allegiance is to the color of dust in your pan. Men from the failed strikes of California and Colorado, Confederate deserters, Union sympathizers, Irish immigrants fresh off the boat, and Chinese laborers seeking a foothold in Gum San, the Golden Mountain, collide in the gulches. They work claims measured in inches, their backs bent forever, their eyes fixed on the glittering prize. But the law is what you make it, or what a man with a gun says it is. Enter Henry Plummer. To the newcomer, he is the earnest, soft-spoken sheriff of Bannack, the territory's first boomtown. He organizes the construction of a gallows, speaks of order. But by night, he is the leader of the Innocents, a ruthless road agent gang whose secret password is "I am innocent." They operate with chilling efficiency, robbing and murdering along the trails between the mining camps. The justice of the mountains is swift and brutal. On a bitter January day in 1864, a vigilante committee of over 2,000 men, formed in secret, storms the Bannack jail. They drag Plummer from his cell. His facade of civility shatters, he weeps, bargains, prays. He is marched to the very gallows he built. The noose is placed around his neck. His last words, a plea, "Give me a good drop, boys." The era of the law west of the Pecos is born not from a badge, but from a rope. Yet even as this internal war rages, a far older and more consequential conflict reaches its fever pitch on the open plains. The buffalo, the walking commissary of the Plains nations, are becoming a commodity. The U.S. Army, under generals like William Tecumseh Sherman and Philip Sheridan, now views the conquest of the West as the final campaign of the Civil War. Their strategy is total: destroy the foundation of indigenous life. Professional hide hunters armed with .50 caliber Sharps rifles, Big 50s, that can kill from half a mile away, move onto the ranges. They take only the hides, leaving millions of carcasses to rot under the sun. The stench is said to carry for miles. This is ecological and cultural warfare. A Crow or Cheyenne hunting party returning to a field of bleached bones understands the message: surrender or starve. The resistance is fierce, desperate, and brilliant. In the rugged Powder River country to the southeast, the Lakota Sioux, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho, led by figures like Red Cloud, Crazy Horse, and Sitting Bull, fight a masterful guerrilla campaign to protect their last great hunting grounds. They are not opposing settlement. They are defending existence. Their victory is stunning. In 1868, the U.S. government, weary of the cost, signs the Fort Laramie Treaty, guaranteeing the unceded Indian Territory, including the sacred Black Hills and the Powder River country, to the tribes in perpetuity. It is one of the few clear military victories by Native Americans in the West. But the word perpetuity is written in the sand. For in the mountains of western Montana, another discovery is made, not of gold, but of copper. And the men who control it, men named Marcus Dolly, William A. Clark, and Augustus Hines, will build empires that make the gold camps look like child's play. Their hunger for wealth and power will demand land, railroads, and the final irrevocable defeat of the tribes standing in the way of progress. The temporary peace of 1868 is merely the quiet between thunderclaps. June 25, 1876. The Little Bighorn River, southern Montana Territory. The heat is a physical weight, pressing down on the rolling, yellowed grasslands. The smell is of dry sage, horse sweat, and dust, thick, choking dust kicked up by the hooves of over 600 U.S. cavalrymen. Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, his famous long hair tucked under a broad-brimmed hat, divides his regiment. He expects to find a manageable village of Lakota and Cheyenne, hostiles. He has not seen the signs or has chosen to ignore them. The travois tracks as wide as a city street, the pony herds so vast they've grazed the hills bare. As Custer's battalion, the 7th Cavalry, crests the Wolf Mountains and looks down into the valley of the greasy grass, the reality strikes them like a physical blow. Below, stretching for over 3 miles along the river, is the largest gathering of indigenous people the Northern Plains has ever seen, a moving city of 7,000 people, including perhaps 1,800 warriors. The sound that rises to meet Custer is not one of panic, but of a unified, rising defiance, the ululating war cries of thousands, the thunderous drumming of ponies at a gallop. It is the sound of a broken treaty fighting back. The Battle of the Little Bighorn is not a battle in the traditional sense. It is an annihilation. In less than an hour, Custer and every man in his immediate command are dead, their bodies stripped and mutilated in accordance with warrior tradition for a foe who came to kill without provocation. The news, when it reaches the East via the telegraph wires Custer so despised, is a national trauma. Custer's last stand becomes instant myth, a symbol of noble sacrifice against savage hordes. But in Montana on the ground, the victory is short-lived. The backlash is swift and total. The U.S. Army, humiliated, redoubles its efforts. Within a year, the bands are hunted down, surrendered, or driven into exile in Canada. The buffalo are all but gone. The tribes are forced onto shrinking reservations, their spiritual and economic spine broken. The Great Sioux War of 1876 is the last, defiant roar of the horse and buffalo culture. Echo fades into the relentless march of the new Montana. That new Montana is forged not in gold, but in the red metal that will electrify a nation, copper. In the Deer Rich Valley, the Salish called SCHL tilde symbol 313XW symbol 34FWY glottal stop E, the place where you shoot deer in the head. A prospector named Marcus Dolly sinks a shaft into the Anaconda lode. What he finds is a seam of copper so pure, so vast, it defies imagination. Butte, a scruffy silver camp perched on the richest hill on earth, transforms overnight. The open pits and subterranean warrens of the Butte mines become a world unto themselves, a toxic, roaring, 24-hour-a-day industrial hellscape. The air is thick with sulfuric smoke from the smelters, poisoning the land for miles. The noise is constant, the shriek of hoists lowering cages of men a half-mile into the earth, the deafening crush of ore stamps, the shunting of rail cars. The men who descend are a new wave of immigrants, Irish, Cornish, Finns, Serbs, Croatians, Italians. They speak a babel of languages, united by the shared peril of cave-ins, rock bursts, and fire. They live in ethnic enclaves, their loyalties divided between their homeland, their union, and the man who signs their paycheck. And in Butte, that man is everything. The War of the Copper Kings begins. Marcus Dolly, the tough Irish immigrant who built the Anaconda Copper Mining Company. William A. Clark, the shrewd, vain former schoolteacher who craves social status and a U.S. Senate seat. And later, the ruthless financier Augustus Hines, who uses mining law loopholes to hijack his rival's ore. Their feud is fought not with armies, but with newspapers, judges, and private detectives. They buy politicians, rig elections, and command private armies of Pinkertons. In 1899, the conflict explodes into literal warfare on the streets of Butte during the War of the Copper Kings, a series of shootouts and dynamite blasts over control of a crucial mine. The state capital, intended for Helena, is nearly stolen by Dolly for his company town of Anaconda in a brazen act of political piracy. This is the Gilded Age unleashed in its rawest form, and Montana is its frontier. The very soul of the future state is up for grabs. Will it be a democratic republic or a corporate fiefdom? The answer comes in part from the people themselves. The miners, facing unimaginable danger for a pittance, organize. The Butte Miners Union becomes the most powerful labor local in the world. Their solidarity crosses ethnic lines, forged in shared darkness. They fight for the 8-hour day, for safety, for dignity. This pressure, combined with the national progressive movement, forces a reckoning. In 1889, as Montana stands on the brink of statehood, a constitutional convention meets. The delegates, having lived under the thumb of the Copper Kings, draft one of the most progressive state constitutions in American history. It includes direct election of U.S. senators, a direct shot at Clark's ambitions, strong water rights, and provisions for citizen initiative and referendum. It is a declaration of independence from corporate tyranny. On November 8, 1889, President Benjamin Harrison signs the proclamation. Montana enters the Union as the 41st state, but the victory is fragile. The Anaconda Company is not defeated, it is merely adapting, and the 20th century will test the resolve of Montanans in ways the Copper Kings could never have dreamed. August 5, 1917. Butte, Montana, the speculator mine. The heat is beyond oppressive. It is a living, malevolent force. A mile below the streets of Butte, in the labyrinthine tunnels of the Granite Mountain and Speculator mines, a crew of electricians is splicing a cable. It is past 11 p.m. A canvas tent hung to keep out dust brushes against the frayed insulation of a power line. A flash, a spark, and then hell itself is unleashed. The tent the timber supports, the very air, saturated with decades of oil and dust, ignite. The fire is not a flame. It is a roaring, racing wall of superheated gas and smoke, traveling through the interconnected shafts at hundreds of feet per second, consuming oxygen and suffocating everything in its path. The sound is a deep, subterranean roar felt through the bedrock. Up on the surface, the night sky is stained an eerie orange by the furnace below. The copper bells of the city's churches begin to toll a frantic, terrible alarm. Wives, mothers, and children rush to the gallows frames, the head frames that mark the mine entrances, their faces etched with a dread as old as Butte itself. They wait for the cages to rise. For 168 men, they will wait forever. The Granite Mountain Speculator fire remains the deadliest hard rock mining disaster in U.S. history. It is not an accident. It is an indictment. The fire becomes the catalyst for a social explosion that had been smoldering for years. The Anaconda Copper Mining Company, now simply the company, is no longer just an employer. It is a state within a state, controlling not just mines and smelters, but newspapers, politicians, and judges. In the wake of the disaster, as grief curdles into rage, the miners' demand for union representation is met with company intransigence. The following spring, industrial agent and former Pinkerton Charles Moyer is kidnapped, beaten, and run out of town by company goons. The IWW Industrial Workers of the World, the radical Wobblies, gain a foothill. In response, the company and federal authorities orchestrate the ultimate crackdown. On June 22, 1917, a parade for a new miners' union is attacked. A gunfight erupts. In the chaos, a young, pro-union man named Frank Little is identified. Days later, 6 masked men drag the crippled IWW organizer from his boarding house bed. They tie him to the rear of a car, drag him through the streets, then hang him from a railroad trestle on the edge of town. A note pinned to his body reads, "First and last warning." The lynching of Frank Little is a message written in terror. The Copper Kings may be gone, but the company's power is absolute. The American ideals fought for at statehood seem a distant memory. But Montana's story in the 20th century is one of duality, a constant tension between extraction and preservation, between corporate power and individual liberty. While Butte bleeds, a different kind of Montanan is making a stand. In the Eastern Plains, the homestead boom, fueled by railroad propaganda and the enlarged Homestead Act, has drawn tens of thousands of hopeful settlers with promises of free land. They break the native sod with steel plows, planting wheat in a country never meant for dryland farming. For a few wet years, it works. Then the drought returns. The 1918-1919 season brings not just failed crops, but a biblical plague of grasshoppers that darken the sky and strip fields to bare dirt. Then the Depression hits, followed by the dirty 30s. The wind, unimpeded across the plowed-over plains, lifts the topsoil in great, rolling black blizzards that bury fences, choke livestock, and seep into the very lungs of the people. This is the Dust Bowl. It is an ecological and human catastrophe that empties entire counties, a stark lesson that the land's patience has limits. Out of this hardship emerges a new consciousness. Montanans begin to see their home not just as a warehouse of resources to be looted, but as a fragile, interconnected ecosystem. This spirit finds its champion in a gangly, bespectacled wildlife biologist from Iowa, Aldo Leopold. Working for the U.S. Forest Service in the Southwest, his epiphany comes in Montana's own Bitterroot Valley. He witnesses a she-wolf die, seeing a fierce green fire dying in her eyes, and understands the vital role of predators, the sacred complexity of the wild. His ideas germinate into a land ethic that will inspire generations. Meanwhile, the children of the homesteaders who stayed, toughened by dust and bankruptcy, develop a stubborn, pragmatic independence. They send to Congress representatives like Jeanette Rankin, the first woman elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, who casts her historic vote against entry into both world wars, declaring, "I cannot vote for war." They elect Mike Mansfield, a former Butte mucker who becomes the longest-serving Senate Majority Leader in history, a quiet giant of the Cold War. The Montana character, self-reliant, skeptical of power, fiercely protective of place, is cemented. This duality reaches its modern climax in the late 20th century. The Berkeley Pit, the monstrous open pit mine that swallowed Butte neighborhoods, closes in 1982. It fills with water so toxic from heavy metals and sulfuric acid that it kills migratory birds that land on it. It stands as a permanent, poisoned monument to the extractive century. Yet, at the same time, Montanans enact some of the nation's strongest environmental laws. They embed in their revised 1972 state constitution the explicit right to a clean and healthful environment, a radical declaration that nature has legal standing. The myth of the last best place is born, a final refuge of unspoiled wilderness, a sanctuary under the big sky. It is a powerful narrative that draws new pilgrims, tech billionaires, Hollywood actors, and seekers of authenticity. But the old tensions never die. They evolve. The clash is no longer between cavalry and warriors, or miners and company men, but between ranchers and environmentalists, between developers and preservationists, between a new economy of tourism and aesthetics and the old economy of resource extraction. The state that holds the headwaters of a continent, where the Missouri, the Columbia, and the Saskatchewan are born, remains a crucible. It is a place where the American story, its greed and its grace, its violence and its beauty, its profound mistakes and its enduring hopes, is written large upon an impossible landscape. The bones of the dinosaurs are still there, deep in the rock. The echoes of the last stand still whisper in the grass. The red metal still stains the earth, and the big sky watches, impartial and eternal, as Montana continues to decide what it will become.